Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Weekly Defence Podcast. I am Richard Thomas and joining me today is news editor Ben Vogel and air editor Tim Martin. Hi both.
Hi Richard.
Hi Rich.
So coming up on this show, I catch up with Asia-Pacific editor Gordon Arthur to discuss the Myanmar unrest, Chinese activities in the South China Sea and procurement highlights from the region. That is, of course, a little bit later in this episode. Let's first look at what has made the headlines this week in defence. And we start in the United States, where the US Army has placed a major order with a sole bidder Lockheed Martin Missiles and Fire Control for guided multiple launch rocket systems rocket pods. Work on the $2.77 billion contract from US Army Contracting Command should be completed by the 31st of October 2024. The deal includes GMLRS alternative warhead and unitary warhead rocket pods, low-cost reduced-range practice rocket pods, cybersecurity services, integrated product support and other services. In the UK, the British Army has deployed the Slingshot Tactical Communications System, operating with the Inmarsat L-band tactical satellite service, as an additional capability alongside in-service Bowman VHF radios. The result for troops is a beyond line-of-sight communications capability that Major General Jonathan Cole, Director of Information and CIO of the British Army, described as a game-changer and a fantastic addition to our communications inventory. According to manufacturer Spectra Group, Slingshot can be integrated with in-service UHF and VHF tactical communication systems to extend the range of radios from 30 kilometres to 1,000 kilometres on the move and in all conditions. And the Royal Navy is continuing efforts to explore the use of unmanned craft after welcoming into service the new Maritime Demonstrator for Operational Experimentation vessel, also known as MADFOX. Developed by L3 Harris for Navy X, MADFOX is derived from the MASS 13 vessel that underwent a series of trials beginning in late 2019. The Royal Navy announced on the 26th of March that, quote, since being delivered, Navy X has been working hard to get MADFOX to sea and ready to begin a demanding year of testing. In more news from the naval domain, state tests of the unusual Russian nuclear submarine Belgorod are expected to begin in May. This would mark a significant milestone for a program that has experienced a series of setbacks and restarts since the submarine was laid down in 1992. With a length of 184 metres, Belgorod is the longest submarine in the world, ahead of the last remaining Typhoon-class nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine in the Russian Navy and longer than the Ohio-class submarines in US Navy service. If state trials prove successful, Belgorod will be the first launch platform for the Poseidon nuclear-armed unmanned underwater vehicle. Shephard understands that the Russian Navy expects to receive its first Poseidon units by the end of 2021. And finally, two key naval programs for the French Navy move forward this week with the confirmation that the hulls of ships 2 and 3 in the FDI frigate build will be delivered by 2024, while the country's Port-Avion Nouvelle Generation carrier plans will progress through design phases until 2025, ahead of the start of construction. The FDI program will deliver 5 Axbow hulled frigates to the French Navy as a means of helping it reach its target of 15 frigates by 2030. Meanwhile, France's next-generation nuclear-powered carrier, likely to displace around 72,000 tonnes, is intended to replace the in-service Charles de Gaulle in the 2038 timeframe. That then concludes our headlines from this week. Time now to focus minds in conversation with the team across the air, land and sea domains. Ben, I'll come to you first to discuss a story by one of Shephard's contributors, Jason Sherman, well known, of course, reporting from New York on a new US next-generation interceptor missile defense program. So take it away.
Okay, yes. This is a pretty big deal in the States. Basically, the next generation interceptor. It's an ambitious project to overhaul the ground-based mid-course defense system in the States with a new guided missile and warhead. Basically, the aim is to defeat the threat of new generation ICBMs from China, North Korea, Russia, and potentially even Iran. Last year, there were 3 industry teams that emerged as contenders. There was one led by Boeing, the incumbent on GMD. There was one led by Lockheed Martin, and another one that was a combination of Northrop Grumman and Raytheon. So far, so unusual, but things have happened since then.
Sounds like you've just left it on a cliffhanger, so just carry on. What's happened?
Okay. There was some talk in Washington after the election of Joe Biden as US president late last year that the new administration wanted to put the entire Next Generation Interceptor project on ice, pending its own review of US missile defence programmes. But last week, the Missile Defence Agency finally made a decision following a 1-month technical review. And it was slightly surprising because they rejected Boeing as a contender to take on this programme. And the two left standing were Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman Raytheon. They're both competing then to deliver a solution even before the original 2028 deadline. Jason quotes an industry official as saying that the MDA is offering incentives to accelerate delivery by, quote, many months. In terms of funding, Richard, the NGI has $1.6 billion up till the end of fiscal year 2022, and it ultimately would lead to contracts with a potential value of $3.9 billion for the Northrop Raytheon team and $3.6 billion for Lockheed. So it's pretty big business.
Was there any indications to why Boeing was removed from the program?
No, there has been no official indication as to why, according to Jason.
Okay, no worries. Thanks, Ben. Tim, moving to airside and yourself, we're going to talk about that Swedish one and the Gripen, I think. So take it away.
That's right, Rich. Yeah, nice quote there from Jeremy Quinn from last week. Listeners will recall. He stood up in Parliament and lo and behold forgot the name of Sweden's Gripen, which, yeah, as blunders go, it's probably not one that he wants to remember, I would suggest. So on to the news specifically. So Saab have come forward and said that they've had a flight test of a 3D printed hatch on Gripen, and that took place at the company facilities in Likoping, hope I've pronounced that right, on the 19th of March. So it's an interesting development, as they say that the hatch could be used in battlefield damage repair processes going forward. Now, obviously, this is a very kind of early development. It's pretty much a new concept, or, well, additive manufacturing element is something they've been working on for over 3 years. So there's plenty of background, but in terms of being able to potentially move this out to the front line, the flight test itself is very interesting. And so in effect, they basically said that they had been using a nylon polymer known as PA 2200, that's the kind of the technical term, at least, for the new hatch, and effectively it would, if these plans were to come to fruition, operationally, the flight test itself would kind of represent something of a stepping stone to allowing operators on the front line to use 3D printed parts and to refit damaged or faulty, and in this case, the hatch, which sits on the top surface of the Gripen.
Yeah, I think you just pointed there that one of the advantages for being able to 3D print parts in situ is reducing that logistics strain, right? Because there across Western militaries, certainly there hasn't been the need in recent decades, in fact, to build up that stockpile so that if something goes wrong, then it can be replaced. Usually things are in quite short supply, so having this ability to print something if needed would be quite good, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the sources that Saab were put forward during a briefing this week were kind of also suggesting that it would be something of a stopgap solution to damage on the front line. So rather than the 3D printed part being a permanent solution that, say, would have 2,000 flight hours, or a life cycle of something in and around that would be good for maintenance checks of, say, 2 years or something like that. They were more talking about the idea that you would potentially use this for 2 or 3 flights, 10 flights. So it's effectively so that you could continue the mission, rather than, you're not going to be printing hundreds of these things at a forward operating base or something like that. That's definitely not the thinking behind that, and to offer, a robust alternative, let's say. So I dare say that, if you did have a serious problem in terms of battlefield damage and things like that, then you would have to be looking at longer term planning and things like that. But certainly this represents something of a technological first, let's say, for Saab, and certainly it looks to be fairly promising. So on the hatch itself, as I say, the sources were kind of talking about success, meaning that from inspection point of view and physical checks, and looking at assessing additional pressure on the hatch once in flight, there's no real outstanding issues, they were saying. So the hatch itself has since been sent to an additive manufacturing consortium, AMEXCI, of which Saab is a member. And so that inspection is to look for deformations or additional cracks that you wouldn't see from physical or from looking at in flight. So they'll continue to do that. I did ask if there was any additional flight tests, to consolidate reliability and performance and things like that. And was told that actually there's nothing firm in the pipeline just yet. So I think it's a little bit of wait and see on this one, just in terms of next steps. But you can assume that there's customer interest from either Sweden or Brazil. And, if there are things in this front to develop, you probably would suggest that you might not hear about them for quite some time. I think it's a kind of new take for Gripen, and certainly there seems to be a long road to run in terms of not just proving out the concept, but making it production relevant or getting it to the front line. And it'd be interesting to see in terms of demand where this goes.
Yeah, so it's less a case of building up stockpiles, as I suggested, but as you said, it's more a case of having a metaphorical spare wheel ready to be put on, so the aircraft can do its next flight, let's say, and then get the problem fixed at a later date.
Yeah, and then just a basic point to make is that Saab are talking about the advantages of this being weight reduction, lower manufacturing costs, shorter lead times, all of those types of things. So yeah, that's kind of the company perspective on it.
Yeah, good stuff. Thanks, Tim. And thanks, Ben. I should probably wish you a good Easter break. So have a great Easter and eat lots of chocolates, or not if you don't want to.
Cheers, Rich.
Good stuff. Right. For our listeners, if you'd like to find out more about Shephard's daily defence news coverage, previous episodes of the podcast, video content, and more, please visit our website, shepherdmedia.com/news. Coming up after the break is my conversation with Gordon Arthur on all the news from the Asia-Pacific region. Stay with us.
Lockheed Martin to deliver target sight systems for FMS
to Australian KC.
Carlos expands tactical communications portfolio.
Multi-band terminal production continues with new
5, Block 15, Block 4 aircraft to receive
Cut through the noise of defense procurement with Shephard's Defense Insight. Save time identifying opportunities, mitigate risk, and get ahead of the competition with the most user-friendly platform in the market. Head over to shepherdmedia.com/demo to request your free demo. Integrated program and equipment data at your fingertips can get you ahead of the competition.
And you're back with us, right? Time to cast our gaze once more to the Asia-Pacific, a region that has claimed huge swathes of column inches in recent weeks through a combination of events, including the repression of populations minority and entire, to outright ignoring international maritime law. Let's turn then to Shephard's Asia-Pacific editor, Gordon Arthur, for his take on some of these pressing geopolitical and security issues, and of course, some of the defence procurement highlights from across the region. Gordon, welcome back. How are things?
Hi there, Richard. Good, thanks.
So I have three regional topics to discuss, and I can't really break them down because they all involve the same, let's say, player.
A common denominator.
Indeed, that's a better way of putting it. So we've got the Myanmar unrest, Chinese activity in the South China Sea, and of course concerns, Taiwanese concerns about Chinese incursions into its airspace. But just looking at the Myanmar unrest first, I mean, for me, I think it's a pretty incredible piece of realpolitik when China and Russia failed to decry the actions taken so far by the Myanmar regime, which has obviously killed or wounded hundreds of its own citizens. At what point will China wake up and realize that it's playing its role of the bad guy down to a T?
In a word, Richard, no. It's interesting. There were defense ministers just the other day came out with a statement sort of deploring what's going on in Myanmar. It was notable some of the absentees from that list. For example, there wasn't a single defense minister from Southeast Asia or from ASEAN willing to put their name on it. So it was the typical sort of Western European, US, Asia, Australasian defense ministers who were deploying it. And then, as an aside, there was a National Armed Forces Day in Myanmar, 27th of March. So there was a big parade, military parade and so on, at exactly the same time as security forces and police were running amok and shooting civilians. As we know from news reports, dozens upon dozens have been killed, and is absolutely horrific. But who was present at this National Day parade? There were official representatives from 8 countries: Russia, China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand. So that in itself is sort of it should be quite embarrassing for any country to be represented in that list, considering all that the armed forces in Myanmar are doing.
Indeed. So onto the maritime domain, and obviously China's activities or new activities in the South China Sea. I'm not sure if it's an extremely well-organized fishing fleet that was claimed to be parked off, was it the Spratly Islands, I think it was, maybe?
Yeah, it was Whitsun Reef, which is part of the Union Bank in the Spratly Islands, so you're absolutely correct. So, yeah, it was sort of like a fishing boat convention. There were 220, I use quotation marks, fishing boats, all lined up in beautiful rows in Whitsun Reef, which is well within the EEZ of the Philippines. So this is just off the western coast of Palawan Island. So you might ask, what were 220 Chinese fishing boats doing there? And if you listen to the Chinese officials, so for example, the Foreign Ministry spokesperson, she told us that Chinese fishing boats had been fishing in the waters near the reef all along. Recently, due to the maritime situation, she was referring to bad weather, which there wasn't actually. Some fishing boats have been taking shelter from the wind near the reef, which is quite normal. So the Philippine government was extremely alarmed and concerned, and even President Rodrigo Duterte, who is a diehard Chinese supporter, he was even concerned and perturbed about this. So Manila lodged a formal diplomatic protest to Beijing, but at latest reports, there were still 183 Chinese fishing boats still present in this reef. You probably remember 2012, there was a standoff between China and the Philippines at Scarborough Shoal, also relatively close by in the Spratly Islands. And the Philippines lost out on that, and China basically took over control of this particular shoal. So just reading some research today from the Naval War College in the USA, they had some pretty interesting details and facts that are total opposite of what the Chinese government was saying. So they identified 7 boats, they're trawlers, but they belong to the People Armed Forces Maritime Militia, which is China's sort of de facto, basically you can call it fishermen in disguise, and who are doing sovereignty missions for the benefit of the Chinese government. So if you follow the automatic identification system tracking of these so-called fishing boats, you see that they routinely travel from the coast of China down to the Spratly Islands. They visit a couple of the military bases that China has there. And then they've also been going to Union Banks and the Whitsun Island. Normally a fishing boat, I mean, they're going to sail around and sort of circle and go back and forward. Interestingly, these boats don't do that. They just go directly to these Chinese naval bases, and they do patrols, and then they head straight home again. So it's absolutely clear that these are members of the People's Armed Forces Maritime Militia. I'm sure some of them may have been fishing boats, but this is obviously and clearly an attempt to assert control over territory in the Philippine EEZ.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the Chinese maritime equivalent of Russia's Little Green Men and the annexation of Crimea. It's doing the same thing, isn't it?
Yep. So, yeah, I mean, they call it grey zone tactics. So make it ambiguous and don't make it too obvious that that it's got official backing. But these ships were, when they were commissioned, I mean, they were built in record time. And when they were commissioned, members of the military were there applauding it all. So often these boats are manned by ex-PLA Navy personnel or ex sort of retired military personnel. So they're definitely performing these missions on behalf of the Chinese government, no matter what the government will say.
So to the final regional topic I wanted to bring up was Taiwan. Obviously, now on the 29th, there was another incursion by 10 aircraft from the PLWF, sorry. So there are obviously concerns, certainly US concerns, that the prospect of conflict or war as China retakes what it sees as a rogue province of Taiwan. They think maybe in the next 5 or 6 years. So realistically, can Beijing be stopped from annexing a country of 23 million people?
I mean, there's a lot of debate. Is China going to attack, or is this just a matter of intimidation? So for now, definitely Beijing has been ramping up the pressuring tactics and the number of air sorties into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. They've been increasing. So China is particularly unhappy with Taiwan and the way the relationship is going. So this is one way to voice their dissatisfaction. Every time a US Navy warship passes through the Taiwan Strait, let us remind our listeners, international waters, any ship has any right to be there, but China jumps up and down and gets all excited and angry and just about blows a blood vessel. So would China attack Taiwan? A very risky proposal. It would draw upon itself sort of the ire of most of the neighbours and a lot of the world. It would be a very painful task. Lots of people would die. So for now, probably not. But definitely they're ramping up the pressure diplomatically, militarily, social media, propaganda, the whole works. It's a whole of nation attempt to isolate Taiwan.
Well, on that cheery note, let's turn to industry then. Maybe we can get some positives there. Where should we go first, air, land or sea?
Let's go to air, Richard.
Okay, air first then. Take it away.
Yeah, so just a story we covered fairly recently, and I thought it was quite an interesting one. So we remember the images of loitering munitions attacking armored vehicles and soldiers and vehicles in the Caucasus area relatively recently. And so a lot of countries seem to be getting on this bandwagon of loitering munitions, this magical weapon that can do all sorts of things. And South Korea and Israel, they're the latest two countries to pair up together. And specifically, we're talking about Korea Aerospace Industries, KAI, and Israel Aerospace Industries, IAI. I mean, with names like that, they're just made for each other, aren't they? So they signed an agreement. They're going to cooperate on loitering munitions and unmanned aerial systems. But the thing I found particularly interesting, KAI, towards the end of last year, they actually published a video of some of the concepts that they have in mind that they would like to equip the South Korean military with. So they had images, for example, of helicopters launching loitering munitions from stub wings from their light armed helicopter. These munitions would be operated by a person in the back of the helicopter. They would send them out. They could perform surveillance, reconnaissance missions, and if they see a target of opportunity, they could also blow them up. Also, in that same video clip, there was a Syrian helicopter, again with an operator in the back with a console, and he would send out a swarm of UAVs, so small loitering munitions that again could identify perhaps a downed pilot behind enemy lines, and again they could release warheads against enemy targets. So that was an interesting little insight into what South Korea is actually looking at. I think it was probably about 2013 or thereabouts at one of the Seoul 8X exhibitions. KI actually showed a loitering munition of its own design. It was called the Devil Killer, and it was designed to target North Korean hostiles, shall we say. So it had a very colourful name. Apparently, it hasn't been developed further, but perhaps this cooperation with IAI will set either that program or similar ones forward. But that's something that South Korea is definitely looking at.
Yeah, I mean, obviously partnering up with Israeli companies, a very good way to do it because Israel has a lot of experience with unmanned systems and loitering munitions. So it seems like a match made in heaven there. Onwards to land, I think. Are we sticking with South Korea as well on this?
Yeah, just coincidentally, we will stick with South Korea. Now, remote control weapon stations or remote weapon stations, let's call them just RWS just to make it easier. So you would expect a modern military like the South Korean army would be just brimming with RWSs, wouldn't you?
I would expect so, but not so?
No. To date, not a single vehicle has an RWS installed, which is quite surprising to me because why have they taken so long to get an RWS on an armoured vehicle? I should note they do. There's some patrol boats do have an RWS, but certainly on land vehicles they haven't existed yet. But that's all about to change. So both the ROC Army and the ROC Marine Corps they're about to receive some RWSs made by Hanwha Defence. So for the ROC Marine Corps, the AAV. The amphibious assault vehicle. These are going to receive an RWS equipped with 40mm grenade launcher and 12.7mm machine gun. So they're going to be installed at some stage soon. And also the K808, which is an 8x8 armoured vehicle produced by Hyundai Rotem. These are also going to be fitted with a lighter weight RWS produced by Hanwha Defence.
Yeah, it seems like a strange omission for the South Korean military to not have an RWS. I mean, it's obviously par for the course for every modern military, and South Korea definitely has a very modern military. Any idea of numbers? I mean, surely it sounds like a significant contract. Yeah,
we don't know the exact numbers yet, but we estimate the ROC Marines have approximately 170 AAVs, so presumably pretty much the majority of the fleet will receive one of these. And for the K808, I mean, the vehicle's still being produced. I believe 100 have been produced so far. So if each one's going to receive one, then that's a fairly substantial order for Hanwha Defence.
Yep, absolutely. Last but not least, onto the seaside and Australia.
The seaside. That's a very appropriate way to introduce this, Richard, because let's talk amphibious seaside.
Oh, yeah, perfect.
So relatively recently, Australia launched a quest worth up to $611 million. So they're looking for two types of amphibious vehicles. One is a landing craft to replace the LCM-8, which has actually been in service in the Australian Army since the Vietnam War era. so getting rather long in the tooth. Australia is looking for between 13 and 15 of these new landing craft. And of course, they'll be required to carry pretty heavy vehicles such as the Boxer, which if you've seen one of those up close, they're absolutely ginormous vehicles. So time to upgrade the landing craft fleet for the Australian Army. And the second requirement that they have is to replace the Lark 5, which is again a rather aging vehicle. It's a four-wheel vehicle. It's amphibious. It can carry cargo, troops from ship to shore. So the Australian Army has 9 of these vehicles, and they're about half a century old. So the time has come to turn them in, and the Army's looking for between 15 and 20 amphibious vehicles that could replace them.
So let me just jump in. Australia's approach to warfare and sort of conflict, has it always had an amphibious capability? Has it maintained it, and is this just a natural replacement of it? Because it seems like, countries like the UK are putting a renewed emphasis on amphibious warfare, obviously looking at the Asia-Pacific region as possibly an area of operations that it might want to involve itself in. So similarly, is Australia adding new amphibious capability, or is this something that they've always had?
I mean, they've always had an amphibious capability, so they've had sort of large landing ships or landing craft, but there has been a major change in Australian concepts of amphibious operations. So I think the beginning of that was when the Australian Navy introduced the HMAS Jules, which was a ex-Royal Navy ship, so an LPD. That was the first time the Australians had obtained such a ship. And that was pretty much an interim step until the 2 Canberra-class LHDs entered service. So as well as your flight deck, they also have the well deck as well. So that was we could call it a step change for the Australian Navy and its ability to prosecute amphibious operations. I mean, mostly they've been used so far, apart from exercises, they've been doing disaster relief, humanitarian assistance type missions, particularly around the Southwest Pacific. But yeah, Australia is thinking a lot more expeditionary in the way that it approaches things, and the ability to move equipment and personnel from ship to shore is an important part of that. So I think that's where these landing craft and the amphibious vehicles fit in, is that final step of moving from the ship to shore. So yeah, definitely Australian Army a lot more amphibious than it used to be.
Yeah, you actually made a really good point there as well, is that amphibious capability isn't necessarily just useful for wartime or for conflict, because you have that humanitarian assistance and disaster relief capability as well, which, as you pointed out, very, very useful and needed in the Asia-Pacific. Yeah.
Well, even in Australia when they had the bushfires, so just over a year ago, I think one of the Canberra-class ships was heavily involved in either evacuating personnel or the helicopters were using it as a platform. So particularly useful at home and abroad.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Gordon. We'll have to leave it there. Have a great rest of the week and weekend, and I will catch you in a few weeks, hopefully.
Great. Thanks, Richard.
You have been listening to another episode of the Weekly Defence Podcast. A big thanks to everyone who took the time in being with us today, and for our listeners, if you enjoyed the show, make sure you like and subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcast. If you want to know more about the market landscape of the defence sector, visit shepherdmedia.com/subscribe and redeem your free trial to our premium news, where you can get international coverage of equipment innovation, company news, programme updates, and more from our team of expert journalists. From me and all the team here at Shephard, we wish you a happy Easter holidays, and until next week, thanks for listening.